Welcome everyone to the first ever office hours session for the new data analytics career track. Super excited to have everyone here today. My name is Kat. I'm the student advisor for the data analytics career track, and I'm joined today by Erik, who is one of our mentors, who will also be the office hours host moving forward. And we've got a few students online as well. So welcome everyone. The way today's session is going to work is we'll spend a few minutes with Erik introducing himself, sharing a little bit about his background. I'll ask him a few other questions about how he got started in data analytics, and you're more than welcome to jump in as well. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask Erik, feel free to unmute your microphone and ask out loud, or post them in the chat in Zoom. And then we'll switch gears a little bit and open it up more broadly too for any questions anyone has yet about the curriculum or projects or the course experience in general. And moving forward, these weekly office hours will be a mix of some general Q&A sessions. Sometimes we'll bring in other guests and do a little interview with them, but really an opportunity to have additional contact with an industry expert like Erik and a chance to get your questions answered. So let's jump right into things. And Erik, it'd be awesome if you could just spend a few minutes introducing yourself, your career in data analytics, and really sharing why you're here as office hours host and as a mentor for the course.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah, I've been in the technology and really data analytics field for about the last 10 years now, which is kind of crazy to me because I still feel like I just graduated yesterday. But my wife and I moved up to New York right after undergrad. We went to school in Washington, D.C. I got to work my first job as a technical support analyst, really meaning that I was a tech support guy for a software company that dealt with legal software. And so I was fielding calls from angry lawyers when their software wasn't working correctly. And that was an interesting job. It had a lot of flexibility that let me do some cool stuff. I actually moved out to Hawaii for a year in that job because I was able to work remotely. I worked a late shift East Coast time, and that worked out just perfectly with the Hawaiian time zone. So that was awesome. And it also got me some intro experience into working with really big database systems. So on that company, they were hosting documents for lawyers to sort through before they went to trial. And they hosted all those documents in an Oracle database that was often gigabytes or terabytes large. And one of the main issues that we had with our software is that it would slow down when the databases got super big and they needed somebody to go in and take a look at the SQL queries that were executing against those Oracle databases and seeing if we could optimize them in any way. So I got kind of a crash course in looking through SQL queries that other people had written, doing a little bit of optimization, and then working as part of a team to get those performing better for our clients. So that was cool. Then when we decided to move to Austin, I left that job and got a first official job as a data analyst working for a telemarketing company in Austin called Yodel. And I worked there for about 2 years. Did some really interesting stuff, helping them build really from the ground up. When I started, they didn't know how many sales they had in a day. They didn't know how much money they had made in a day. They didn't know how many phone calls people had made. And they knew that they needed that reporting and they had all that data, but they just hadn't had the bandwidth or anybody on staff with the knowledge to be able to create those reports. So my coworker and I really built that whole reporting infrastructure from the ground up. We started working in a completely Excel-based environment with just a SQL backend. And we actually went really, really far with that. We twisted and tortured Excel and made it do all sorts of interesting stuff. And then finally, when it really wasn't working for us anymore, we were early adopters of Tableau and got Tableau to be our front end for our SQL queries. So I've worked with Tableau since 2011. and it's been a great tool that I've really enjoyed working with. Now, I think in this course we're going to be, are we working with Tableau or are we working with Power BI?
Either or. Students have the option to do both.
Cool. Yeah, I've worked a little bit with Power BI too. Definitely more versed in Tableau, but they're both great tools. And yeah, so then once the base of that reporting infrastructure was built out, moved on to doing some more cool stuff. I think the coolest thing I did in that job was build a lead scoring system, all written in SQL. So I was taking information from a bunch of different related categories in our potential leads database, compiling them together, giving them scores, and then preemptively scoring leads that no one had contacted before to see which leads should get passed out to which agents. So that was really cool. Apparently, it really improved the performance of the sales floor once it got rolled out, and it felt really good to do. But that job was really far from my house, and I got really tired of the commute. So I ended up leaving there and joining an advertising agency right in downtown Austin. Sold my car, and I've been riding my bike around ever since. I was the senior data strategist for the agency McGarrett Jesse, and they had some really cool brands, mostly really big Texas clients. If anyone's familiar with Whataburger, they were our biggest client. They're a huge fast food chain in Texas and the Southeast, starting to expand now into Chicago and down into the Southwest as well. But also Shiner Beer and Yeti Coolers were some other high-profile clients that we had while I worked there. So that was really interesting to get experience in all those brands. That was really working hand in hand with our client stakeholders, getting them to understand why data was important. Many of them were strictly from the marketing team, and so they didn't really understand what the importance of having a website correctly tagged was for their underlying business. So it was lots of meetings, lots of talking with people, and it was a really rewarding experience. I think that it really helped me develop as an analyst in terms of the interpersonal side, being able to work with people who might not be as familiar with the importance of data and why we go about doing certain things the way that we do them. And yeah, it was super fun. I actually only left that job because my wife and I decided that we wanted to build a tiny house. So I took about a year off of work and built a tiny house. I wanted to do something with my hands instead of just being on the computer all the time. So that was a super cool project. We lived in that on and off for about a year and a half. Now we live back in our actual house and have a permanent renter out there in the tiny house, but it was a really fun project. We're hoping to do something similar next summer up in Colorado. And then most recently, I worked at a short-term vacation rental management company doing like pricing analytics and just overall general business intelligence work for them, getting them more detail about their business, how things were run, and how they could be more efficient. And now currently I'm taking some time off from work to go back and do my master's. I'm starting at the Georgia Tech online master's in computer science now in 12 days, which is kind of crazy. And looking forward to that and developing the more computer programming side of my career.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Eric. Really interesting insights across those different jobs, and cool to hear about your tiny house as well. Before I jump into other questions, any students have questions about anything that Eric just mentioned, any of those different jobs or work environments, feel free to put those questions in the chat, or you can unmute your microphone and ask out loud as well. Any takers right now? I see someone is messaging me privately in the chat, so I'll keep an eye on that and read out a question if there is one. But for now, I'm curious, Eric, if you were to advise someone who's just getting started in data analytics in terms of like what kinds of tools are important to know and what kind of experience is important to be able to bring to the table in, say, an interview setting, what kind of advice would you have around how to present yourself?
Yeah, definitely. In terms of tools, I really think that the Springboard curriculum has done a great job of nailing what the three most important tools that I think are for a data analyst: Excel, Tableau, and SQL. Adding on to that would be some Python if you're feeling a little ambitious. But really, the core of it all comes from Excel and understanding data, and how to structure data and how to work with structured data. But yeah, I think that that really flows from Excel to doing some visualization work in Tableau. And then when you really get a good understanding of Excel and how to write more complicated formulas, that helps bridge the gap when you start working in SQL and visualizing databases and data structures in your mind so that you can write queries against them to pull out the data. And then eventually you kind of lose the Excel because you're just working directly with SQL and Tableau or whatever type of reporting tool you're rolling out for your company. But those would definitely be the key skills that I'd say are important to learn these days.
That's awesome. Yeah. And then looks like we have a question in the chat from Daniel. Erik, how do you like working remotely compared to working in an office? And what direction do you see remote job openings heading?
That's a great question. I am somebody who really likes working remotely. I know that a lot of people get a lot of satisfaction from working in an office right around a bunch of other people. But I personally really like to have like some quiet space around me to get into the flow of doing programming or visualization. And I think that that really helps to put out some good work products. That being said, it's actually kind of difficult to find remote positions for data analysts because there is so much interpersonal communication that you have to do when you're trying to understand these questions and clarification that you need on certain metrics or how things need to be measured, or involving different teams or working around different restrictions that IT groups might have put up to try and firewall different systems apart from each other. So I think that it's definitely possible to do all of this remotely. And it's something that I've enjoyed doing, but you have to be really on top of building out your inner company network to all of your key stakeholders, and making sure that they're all on board with you, trusting you even while they don't have face-to-face contact with you. Yeah, those would be the things that I think are most important. And in terms of where do I see it going in the future, I'm hoping that there are more remote jobs. Since I like working remotely, that's what I'm hoping to do when I get out of this master's program. So I'm crossing my fingers.
Cool. Another question in the chat. Since you've used Power BI and Tableau, which one did you like the most and why?
I personally like Tableau a little bit more than Power BI, just because I think it's a more mature tool, and it is just really intuitive, I think, to get access to data, get connected, and then build stuff on top of it within like 10 or 15 minutes. As long as you have some idea of the basics of working with Tableau, it's really, really easy to pick things up and to start building visualizations and making insights. Power BI definitely has a place though, because it's part of the Microsoft suite, so it really integrates easily with that environment if you're in a Microsoft environment. And it also is a really cool tool because they have priced it really aggressively. And I think it's only like $5 a month per user for people to see your visualizations, whereas Tableau is more on the $30 a month per user. So at my last company, the vacation rental management company, that was actually a really big issue that we had with Tableau, because we had about a 300-person team that needed access to these visualizations that we had built, but we did not have the budget for getting everybody online monthly license to actually use them. So we worked for a couple months to try and figure out how to get people access either through Tableau or rebuilding things in Power BI or using Google's Data Studio product, which is a free data visualization tool. We ended up using a solution that one of our IT people came up with, which was like a third-party password sharing thing, so that we only had to get a few Tableau licenses, one for each business group, and then everybody signed in through that shared password. Not sure if that's okay with Tableau or not, but that's what we ended up doing. So yeah, I mean, but they're both great tools. They're really powerful. I'm happy to see that Tableau has some really strong competition because they've definitely just dominated the data visualization space for a good 5 years. So yeah, I'm excited to get into Power BI a little bit more and see what it can do too.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for those insights. And quick note for everyone that you will have access to free versions of Power BI and Tableau through the course, so you don't need to worry about the license cost for those. Another question in the chat: most of the jobs that I see require some years of experience. How can someone who has no experience in data analytics be able to get a job related to data analytics? And I can jump in from the career services side perspective, but Erik would love to hear from you as well.
Sure. I mean, I think that what helped me get my first job was being able to talk about projects that I had done myself. I am also really into personal finance. And so even when I was really young, I was building different little personal finance Excel sheets and trying to visualize compound growth and making budgets and stuff. And so getting that experience in Excel and having some relevant projects that I could talk about in terms of like financial data that I had worked with personally really helped me get in the door of that first data analyst job that I had at Yodel. So I'd say just do some projects on your own. See if you can tailor them to an industry that you're interested in working in. And as long as you have some good stuff to talk about in an interview, and you're able to get your resume into a place that you get through the frontline screening and get in front of somebody or get onto a phone screen, then those projects that you've worked on should be enough to carry you through.
Yeah, exactly. Building off of what Erik said, you'll be working on 2 capstone projects in this course, which will really allow you to have a big project that you can talk about in an interview or in a phone screen and really point to something that you've actually done that demonstrates that you do have these skills. And on top of that, in addition to those technical skills, you'll have an opportunity to work with career coaches throughout the course. And that's really personalized career support. So, everyone has a different story. Everyone has different educational experience and past work experience. And so figuring out for you, what does your job search strategy look like? How can you leverage your past experience, the projects you've built in this course to really present yourself as the ideal candidate in the roles that you're looking at. So yeah, that'll be exciting to see come to life in these next few months. Any other questions right now? We can also open it up a little bit. So if anyone has questions about the course experience so far or any of the first curriculum units that you've worked through, please feel free to, again, unmute your microphone and ask out loud or post in the chat as well. I'll jump in with a question while we wait for others. One piece that is also critical to the work of a data analyst, and you've alluded to it a little bit, is really communicating with stakeholders and figuring out not just how to run an analysis, but then also put it into words or images that will allow others to then carry that work forward. So can you talk a little bit about like building that skill and experience that you've had with that in your past work experiences?
Yeah, sure. That's definitely something that I think is glossed over way too much as people are going into this career. It's definitely something that I wasn't expecting to be as important as it really is. I think you hit kind of on 2 things where you were talking about talking with people and communicating effectively, but also building visualizations that are engaging and beautiful, because they both are kind of hand in hand and really important, much more important than I thought that they would be. So just being in touch with people is super important because it's really easy to get into the zone of just working in the data and thinking that you're going down the right path and spending a day or 2 days or a week going down one avenue of analysis, and you think you're just killing this problem, and then you come back to your stakeholder in the end and they're like, no, this isn't what I was talking about at all. It's not how we measure things. This isn't the right data source, blah, blah, blah. So it's really important to be not constantly checking in with people, but probably at least once a day checking in with your stakeholder saying, hey, these are my findings today. Does this make sense? Can you give it a sanity check? That's a huge thing that I found, especially having worked in so many different industries, is you end up working with data that you're not familiar with. And so having somebody that you can talk with and sanity check your work for you really is important, because sometimes it's as simple as you just misplaced a decimal point somewhere, and you can just not really realize it if you're thinking that you're going to be working in tens and you're working in thousands or whatever, and somebody else can spot that almost immediately. So I think that that's really important. And then the other piece of building things that are visually engaging is something that I learned in my first data analytics job. I was always just kind of somebody who put together a line graph that showed what I was trying to get across and called it good, and hit publish, and people used it and it was fine. But my coworker was really into creating engaging, well thought out visualizations, and he made some stuff that just really blew me away, and people loved using it. And I think even though the tools that he made weren't any better, quote unquote, in terms of giving real business value, people definitely used them a lot more than the stuff that I built, because they just looked better and they were more fun to use. So I definitely think that that's super important as well, to have just some aspect of design in what it is that you're building. At least just picking colors that don't super clash, because apparently that was a mistake that I made all the time.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Another question that a student actually emailed to me today is just around the differences between a business analyst and a data analyst. And so I'm wondering, in your words or in your experience at different companies, what is the difference, and what kinds of skills or tools are more involved with one versus the other?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question, because business analyst is a term that can really mean something very specific in certain industries, and other times it's much more loosely defined and can be closer to a data analyst. In the truest sense of the word, a business analyst is somebody who hears about a problem that a company needs to solve and is the one who comes up with breaking down just like the concept from management or whoever your stakeholder is into pieces that the engineering team can tackle and solve. So they're more of like a kind of project manager, or person who just really understands the underlying business and the technical side of the business, so that the tech people don't have to necessarily try and do all of that extra work. They can just focus on the technical problems. I think that the other way that people talk about a business analyst is sort of more along the lines of a data analyst, but maybe just a little bit more of a loose definition, having more to do with just like all sorts of different pieces of the organization. I always envision it as somebody at a pretty small organization that's just kind of like the general data person. Whereas a data analyst to me means something that is more focused on just data projects, sort of less of the business side, but definitely that's important as well. Just like I said, you don't want to not know anything about what you're talking about and get caught up in a bad analysis just for lack of information, but more technical than a business analyst. I would say that the skills that I would expect a data analyst to have would be more along the SQL programming and data visualization side, where a business analyst would be much more just in Excel.
Cool. Yeah, super helpful. Thanks so much. And then we've got another question in the chat. What do you think would be the main challenge for a new data analyst?
I think probably I would actually say that's probably having confidence. At least that was something that I had trouble with when I started out, because you really do need to sort of exude an air of knowing what you're talking about for people to take anything that you produce seriously. So going into a new environment with new people, talking to them in a way that they can respect you and start to bring you in on conversations so you can have deeper understanding about the business and the data that you'll be working with. And then working with the data, being familiar enough with the tool sets that that company is using so that you can really be productive and helpful for them, and then present that analysis well and actually provide value for the team. And once you start doing that, then that confidence really becomes a lot easier because something that you've done before. And I think that it's kind of a fake it till you make it thing.
Totally, yeah. Was there a moment like that for you where you feel like with a project or some sort of deliverable, you felt like you started to really build that confidence and own that data analyst role?
Yeah, I mean, I think that basically that whole first like 6 months that I was at Yodel was definitely a fake it till you make it, in my mind at least, because even though this company didn't really know anything then when we were building reports for them, it was still my first real job in the industry, and we were kludging things together from a bunch of different systems and definitely not necessarily using Excel in the way that it was meant to be used, and doing all sorts of things that were just solving the problems, but not necessarily in the way that might or might not be thought of as best practice by somebody with more experience. But then we just kind of made it work, and the things that we had built ended up functioning well, and the ones that didn't function well, we went back and revised and got them to a place where everyone was happy. And I think that it really was just exactly that, where we were just kind of solving things that we could solve and going back and fixing things that were broken. And then eventually we got into the flow and really did a great job for that company.
That's awesome. Yeah, sounds like a really iterative approach with lots of feedback. So
Definitely.
that's awesome, and similar to what you'll experience in the course too. Working with your mentor around, tackling a problem, maybe running into a roadblock or not quite knowing where to go next, and then taking a step back, readjusting, and moving forward. So that's really cool to see that mirrored in the workplace. And then what we'll do as the final question for today is working in different industries. How was the transition? Was it easy?
It was actually surprisingly easy. It was something that I was a little intimidated by, going from a pretty niche industry of telemarketing to the much more general world of advertising. And it's kind of crazy how like the metrics that people focus on and how to calculate KPIs, key performance indicators, and just the kind of skills that you need to do a good job with data in general are very transferable from industry to industry. So yeah, I would say I was very surprised at how easy the transition was to go from a field that was really pretty niche to something that was super general.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for all of that insight, Eric, and thank you for everyone who asked questions. We'll wrap things up for today, but next week we'll be back, same place, same time, for 30 minutes again, and we'll open it up to any questions then, both related to the curriculum, any exercises or projects that you're starting to work through, as well as any additional questions you might have for Eric. And I'll go ahead and post this recording in the Slack community, in the recordings channel, so that you can have access to that as well. And feel free to reach out to me via email with any questions. And you can also post any requests or questions in the Slack community, and we'll incorporate those into future office hours. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Eric. Thanks for sharing more about yourself, and have a wonderful rest of the day or night, depending on where you're located, and talk to you all soon.
All right, sounds good. See ya.
Bye.